Somewhere in Japan right now, a real estate agent is standing in a genkan, sliding open a closet door, and very carefully not mentioning what the law technically requires them to mention. Japan has an actual legal term for this. It's called jiko bukken, stigmatized property. If someone dies a violent or unnatural death in an apartment, the landlord has to disclose it to the next tenant. Sometimes for years, sometimes depending on how the courts rule that particular season. Forever. Because people kept trying to hide it, an entire industry sprang up around exposing it instead. There's a website called Oshima Land that maps every one of these addresses across Tokyo. Thousands of small black skull icons pinned over ordinary apartment blocks, ordinary train stations, ordinary neighborhoods you have almost certainly walked through without knowing. Some of those units rent for half of market value. People move in anyway, mostly because they can't afford not to. A few addresses on this list were bulldozed the moment the story broke because no amount of legal disclosure was ever going to make them sellable again. A few are still standing, unmarked, indistinguishable from the house next door, lived in by families who had nothing to do with what happened there and everything to do with living with it afterward. And one of them, the very last one on this list, has a killer who has never been caught, who is, statistically, still alive, and who may very well be your neighbor. These are 11 addresses in Japan that stopped being homes. Let's start at the bottom. Number 11, the poisoned wine incident, Kuzuo Village, Mie Prefecture. Kuzuo isn't really a village anymore. It's barely a footnote on a map, a scattering of 25 farmhouses straddling the border between Mie and Nara prefectures, so remote that the only way in was a single mountain road. Everyone in Kuzuo knew everyone in Kuzuo. That's important, because of what happened on the evening of March the 28th, 1961. The Residents Association held its annual meeting at the village community hall, and afterward, as was tradition, there was a toast. Sake poured for the men, white wine for the women. Within minutes of drinking, 17 women collapsed with violent stomach cramps and convulsions. 5 of them died before the night was over, including the wife and the mistress of the man who had personally carried the wine bottles from the association chief's house to the hall that afternoon, a farmer named Masaru Okunishi. When investigators tested the wine, they found an organophosphate pesticide had been mixed into it deliberately. Sometime during the roughly 10 minutes Okunishi had been alone with the bottles, he became the only realistic suspect in a village where an outsider simply could not have slipped in and out unnoticed. After 5 days of continuous police interrogation, officers reportedly staying in his house overnight, watching him even when he used the bathroom, Okunishi confessed just after midnight. He recanted the very next day. Here's where this case stops being a simple murder story and becomes something much stranger. The district court acquitted him in 1964 for lack of evidence. The Nagoya High Court overturned that and sentenced him to death in 1969. The Supreme Court upheld it in 1972. Over the following 4 decades, Okunishi filed for a retrial not once, not twice, but 10 separate times. In 2005, a court actually granted a retrial and suspended his execution, only for a different panel of judges to reverse that decision a year later. He died in a Tokyo prison hospital in 2015 at 89 years old, having spent more time on death row than almost anyone in Japanese legal history. His 11th retrial petition, still filed and still pending. To this day, his family and lawyers continue fighting to clear his name. If Okunishi really was innocent, that means someone in a village of 25 families poisoned 5 of their own neighbors and never said a word for 60 years. Number 10, the Sada Abe incident, Shibuya, Tokyo. Not every entry on this list needs a house with a crawl space to earn its place. Some just need one very small room in one very ordinary inn. In May 1936, a woman named Sada Abe was working as the manager of a restaurant and inn in Tokyo when she began an affair with the owner, Kichizo Ishida. Their relationship escalated, by most accounts deliberately on both sides, into increasingly intense, erotic asphyxiation. On the morning of May 18th, during sex, Abe strangled Ishida with the cord of her kimono sash until he died. She did not call for help. She did not flee immediately. She cut off his genitals with a kitchen knife, wrote a message on his chest and thigh in his own blood, and carried the severed flesh with her for 4 days as she wandered Tokyo, before police finally located her asleep in another inn with a photograph of Ishida tucked under her pillow. What happened next is the part that makes this case genuinely strange rather than simply gruesome. In a Japan that was becoming steadily more militarized, more repressive, and more publicly puritanical by the month, Sada Abe became something close to a folk hero. Newspapers ran sympathetic coverage. Strangers sent her love letters in prison. The public read her as a woman consumed by passion in a society that had almost no room left for it. She served 6 years of a much lighter sentence than the crime would suggest today, was released, and lived for decades afterward. Reportedly working, at different points, in a bar that traded on her own infamy. The story became the basis for the internationally acclaimed and, in Japan, still partially censored film In the Realm of the Senses. The inn itself is long gone. The legend of the room where it happened is not. Number 9. The Tsuyama Massacre, Kamo, Okayama Prefecture. Before there was a single mass shooting in modern memory to compare it to, there was Tsuyama. On the evening of May 20th, 1938, a 21-year-old man named Mutsuo Toi cut the power line to his own hamlet, plunging the 23 households of Kamo village into total darkness. He strapped 2 flashlights to his head like a makeshift miner's lamp, armed himself with a modified shotgun, a katana, 2 daggers, and an axe, and at around 1:30 in the morning, he walked into his grandmother's room first and killed her by decapitation. Then he went house to house. For the next 90 minutes, Toi moved through a village where every single resident was someone he had known his entire life, entering homes that had never once needed to be locked, and killed them in their sleep, one family at a time. By the time he turned the shotgun on himself just before 3 in the morning, 30 people were dead. 3 more were seriously wounded. It remains to this day the deadliest killing spree ever carried out by a single individual in Japanese history. The why is almost as unsettling as the what. Toi had been an outgoing, high-achieving child, orphaned young by tuberculosis and raised by a strict grandmother who limited his contact with the outside world. He grew socially withdrawn in his late teens after his sister married and moved away, developed his own case of tuberculosis that barred him from farm work, and became fixated on a sensational 1936 murder trial and on yobai, a fading rural custom of men creeping uninvited into women's bedrooms at night, which had made him a subject of local gossip and rejection. Historians now generally describe him as an early, almost eerily specific case study in the kind of isolated, resentful young man. True crime audiences would spend the next 80 years learning to recognize. The hamlet of Kamo was eventually absorbed into the modern city of Tsuyama and no longer exists as a distinct place on any current map. But the massacre gave its name to a genre of Japanese horror fiction that is still being made. Number 8. The Sakamoto Family Murder, Yokohama. This is the entry where the house itself is almost beside the point, because what makes it disturbing is how long the truth stayed buried underneath it. In November 1989, a young human rights lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was building a legal case against a religious organization called Aum Shinrikyo, representing families who said the group had defrauded and psychologically manipulated their relatives. On the night of November 3rd, several members of that same organization broke into his apartment. They killed Sakamoto, his wife Satoko, and their 1-year-old son Tatsuhiko while they slept, then carried all 3 bodies out of the building and buried them separately in 3 different remote mountain prefectures, hundreds of kilometers apart. Specifically so, the bodies would never be found together or possibly ever found at all. For 6 years, the case sat unsolved. Investigators had suspicions about Aum Shinrikyo almost from the beginning. A baby's pacifier-shaped pin of a type the group's members wore was found at the scene. But the trail went cold and the group continued operating, growing and radicalizing in plain sight. It wasn't until March 1995, when Aum Shinrikyo carried out its sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system, killing 13 people and injuring thousands, that arrested members finally began confessing to earlier crimes, including what had happened to the Sakamoto family nearly 6 years earlier. The bodies were exhumed from the mountains where they'd been hidden. The warning had been sitting in a Yokohama apartment building the entire time. Number 7. Tsutomu Miyazaki, the otaku murderer, Saitama Prefecture. Between August 1988 and June 1989, 4 girls between the ages of 4 and 7 disappeared from towns around Saitama Prefecture and western Tokyo, one after another, months apart, each time snatched off a quiet residential street on her way home. Each time, she turned up dead. The man responsible was Tsutomu Miyazaki, a quiet, unremarkable 26-year-old who worked at his family's print shop, lived at home with his parents and grandfather, and by every account of his coworkers and neighbors, kept entirely to himself. He mailed the family of one victim a taunting, ransom-style letter, assembled from words cut out of magazines. He mailed a newspaper a package containing some of his final victims' cremated remains, along with a note taking credit for the killings. He was finally caught in July 1989, not for the murders directly, but after he was spotted attempting to photograph 2 young sisters in a park, and their father chased him down. When police searched his room, what they found became, in a strange way, almost as infamous as the crimes themselves. Over 5,000 videotapes, stacked floor to ceiling, alongside horror films, animation, and material investigators described as deeply disturbing. In a country still working out what to make of a rising generation of young men who lived almost entirely inside their bedrooms and their media collections, the press immediately branded him the otaku murderer, and the case triggered a genuine moral panic. Years of public debate over whether isolation and media consumption had somehow manufactured a killer, or simply given one somewhere to hide. Miyazaki was sentenced to death and executed in 2008, 19 years after his arrest. Number 6. The Kobe child murders, Kobe, Hyogo Prefecture. In May 1997, the severed head of an 11-year-old boy named Jun Hase was found placed deliberately on the gate of a Kobe middle school, with a note stuffed into its mouth, taunting the police and daring them to try to catch the killer. Written unmistakably in the voice of someone treating the entire investigation as a game. The nation assumed, understandably, that it was looking for an adult. The killer turned out to be a 14-year-old classmate of the victim's older sibling, a boy who would later become known to the Japanese public only under the pseudonym he chose for himself, Seito Sakakibara. Because Japanese law shields juvenile offenders from being named or having their faces published, he served a sentence in a juvenile medical facility rather than an adult prison, and was released years later under a new legal identity, effectively allowed to disappear back into the country he had terrorized as a child. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. In 2015, Sakakibara self-published a memoir describing the killing in his own words, reportedly to profit from his own infamy, which reignited a wave of national anger that had never fully subsided. The case remains one of the primary reasons Japan lowered the age of criminal responsibility in the years that followed, a direct legislative response to a single 14-year-old in a single ordinary Kobe neighborhood that the country still hasn't entirely made peace with. Number 5. The Kitakyushu serial confinement murders, Fukuoka Prefecture. This one doesn't have a body count that jumps off the page. It has something worse, a method. Between 1996 and 1998, a man named Futoshi Matsunaga and his common-law wife, Junko Ogata, killed at least 7 people inside a shared apartment in Kitakyushu. most of them Ogata's own family, her parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, and her sister's 2 young children, ages 5 and 10. Matsunaga rarely killed anyone with his own hands. He didn't need to. Using electric shocks, prolonged starvation, sleep deprivation, and relentless psychological manipulation, he spent months systematically turning family members against one another, forcing them to inform on each other, to beat each other, and eventually, to kill each other, one by one, while he directed the process from a step removed. From the outside, the apartment was nothing. A cramped, ordinary residence in a cramped, ordinary building. The kind of place where you might hear an argument through the wall and assume it was just a family being a family. Inside, at least one victim was tortured and controlled for years before he finally died. Bodies were dismembered afterward and disposed of in the sea and in public restrooms to avoid detection. The case only came to light in 2002 when a surviving teenage girl who had been raised inside that system of control finally managed to escape and go to the police. Both Matsunaga and Ogata were sentenced to death. Ogata's sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment on appeal, in part because the courts ultimately treated her too as one of Matsunaga's victims. Number 4. The Junko Furuta case, Adachi, Tokyo. Some of the addresses on this list are famous because of what a stranger did. This one is remembered and argued about because of who did it and how young they were. In November 1988, a 17-year-old high school student named Junko Furuta was walking home in Adachi Ward, Tokyo, when she was abducted by a group of teenage boys, one of whom she had briefly known. She was taken to an ordinary residential house, a family home, on an ordinary street in an ordinary neighborhood, and held there against her will for over 40 days. What was done to her during that time became and remains one of the most notorious crimes in modern Japanese history, and one that Japanese media, to this day, largely declines to describe in detail out of respect for both the severity of the case and her family. All 4 perpetrators were minors at the time. Under Japan's juvenile law, none of them were named publicly, and none served what the public would come to see as an adequate sentence. The longest of the 4 terms was 8 years. The public fury over the leniency of those sentences didn't fade. If anything, it grew over the following decades, as at least one of the men involved was later linked to further criminal activity as an adult. The case is now widely credited as one of the driving forces behind Japan's gradual reform of its juvenile sentencing laws, reform that critics and Furuta's own family still argue hasn't gone nearly far enough. Number 3. The Sagamihara Care Home Stabbings, Kanagawa Prefecture. In the early hours of July 26, 2016, a 26-year-old man named Satoshi Uematsu broke a first-floor window at Tsukui Yama-Yuri-en, a residential care facility for people with severe intellectual and physical disabilities on the outskirts of Sagamihara. He tied up the night shift caregiver on duty, and then, moving calmly from room to room in a building he knew intimately, he'd worked there for over 3 years before being let go. He began stabbing residents as they slept. In under 40 minutes, he killed 19 people, ages 18 to 70, and wounded 25 more, 20 of them critically. He then drove himself to the local police station, carrying 3 bloodstained knives in a bag, and turned himself in, reportedly telling officers, "It's better that the disabled disappear." Here's the detail that turns this from a shocking crime into a genuinely chilling one. 5 months before the attack, Uematsu had personally delivered a letter to the Speaker of Japan's Parliament, laying out almost exactly what he intended to do and offering to do it himself in exchange for immunity. He was involuntarily hospitalized for 2 weeks, evaluated, and released as no longer a threat. He knew the facility's night shift staffing would be down to a skeleton crew. He knew which window didn't have an alarm. It remains the deadliest mass killing in Japan since Tsuyama, 78 years earlier, and the second entry on this list, back to back, where the warning arrived on time and nobody stopped it anyway. Number 2. Takahiro Shiraishi, the Twitter killer. Zama, Kanagawa Prefecture. If you want to understand how a horror story updates itself for a new decade, look at what happened in a 13.5 square meter studio apartment in the quiet Tokyo suburb of Zama in the fall of 2017. Over roughly 2 months, a 27-year-old man named Takahiro Shiraishi searched Twitter for a very specific kind of post. People, mostly young women, writing that they wanted to die but were afraid to do it alone. He messaged them, offered companionship, and invited them to his apartment. 9 people went. None of them left. Police were only led to the address in October 2017 while investigating the disappearance of one missing 23-year-old woman after her brother noticed suspicious messages on her account. What officers found inside that studio apartment, Japanese media simply started calling the House of Horrors. 9 severed heads and more than 240 human bones, packed into picnic coolers and toolboxes scattered around the small room, some of it covered in cat litter, to mask the smell from neighbors on the other side of a very thin wall. Shiraishi confessed almost immediately and pleaded guilty at trial, telling the court he had targeted people already in crisis because it made them, in his words, easier to manipulate. He was sentenced to death in 2020 and executed in June 2025. The case forced Twitter, now X, to rewrite its global policies on suicide-related content. A small specific apartment in a Tokyo suburb that ended up changing how one of the biggest platforms in the world moderates the entire internet. Number 1. The Setagaya family murder, Kamisoshigaya, Tokyo. Here's the one that will actually keep you up. On the night of December 30th, 2000, sometime after 11 p.m., an intruder climbed through a second-floor bathroom window of an ordinary 2-story house in the Setagaya ward of Tokyo, belonging to a family named Miyazawa. Mikio, 44, was attacked first upstairs and fought hard enough to injure his attacker before he was stabbed to death. His wife Yasuko, 41, and their 8-year-old daughter Naina were stabbed downstairs. Their 6-year-old son Ray was strangled in his bed. All 4 members of the family were dead within the first hour. And then, instead of running, the killer stayed. He used the family's first-floor computer to browse the internet at 1:18 in the morning. He appears to have napped on their sofa. He ate food from their kitchen. He used their toilet without flushing. He rifled through the house for hours, dumping paperwork and belongings into the bathtub, apparently searching for something. Money, records. Nobody has ever been sure what, before finally leaving sometime before dawn, on foot, through a neighborhood full of houses whose residents heard absolutely nothing. The bodies were discovered the next morning by Yasuko's own mother, who lived next door and had been unable to reach the family by phone. What followed became one of the largest criminal investigations in Japanese history. More than 280,000 officers have been assigned to the case at various points over the past 25 years, examining upward of 12,500 individual pieces of evidence. And unlike almost every unsolved case you've ever heard of, this one isn't short on evidence. The killer left behind DNA, fingerprints, his own discarded clothing, even a partial shoe print. An almost absurd amount of physical evidence for police to work with. It has never been enough. A 20 million yen reward, the largest ever offered in Japanese criminal history, is still on the table. Officers still return to the site every December 31st to hold a quiet memorial. As recently as a few years ago, investigators were still revising their estimate of how old the killer would have been that night, currently somewhere between 15 and 22. This is what makes it number 1. Not the body count. Plenty on this list is worse. It's the fact that whoever did this didn't need to run because he wasn't afraid. He killed a family of 4 in their own home and then behaved for several hours afterward like a man relaxing in a house that was his. Then he walked out into an ordinary Tokyo morning on an ordinary street and simply became nobody again. Statistically, he could still be alive. He could be someone's neighbor. He could, at this exact moment, be sitting somewhere watching a video exactly like this one. If there's an address like this where you live, a house your parents warned you about, a building your neighbors go quiet talking about, leave it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if enough of you ask about the same place, that's the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.